In this video, we'll be going over the bottom-up constant space approach of Decode ways. So previously, in the bottom-up array approach, in each of the iteration, we can see that we are only relying on values from I plus 1 and I plus 2. This means we can represent these two values using two variables instead of an array. So let's go over the dot process. So in the 2D, in the array bottom-up approach, in each of the iteration, we are only relying on values from indices I plus 1 and I plus 2. This means we can represent the array using two variables instead. Then in each of the iteration, we will be updating these two variables. Let's go over the dot process, or the pseudocode. So previously we created an array to keep track of the number of ways. This time we're going to create two variables. So we're going to create two variables. The ways 1, so the number of ways at I plus 1, initially going to be equal to 1. We can think of this as the number of ways when our current index is out of bound. When the current index is out of bound, we have found one way to decode the input string. Then we have ways 2, the number of ways at I plus 2, which is initially going to be equal to 0. Then we're going to iterate through the indices from the last index to 0, denoted as I. We do not need this anymore. Then we're going to create a variable, ways, to keep track of the number of ways at the current index I. Then we're going to create two variables representing num1, num2 is equal to the numeric value if we decode 1 digit and the numeric value if we decode 2 digits. So if num1 is between 1 to 9, then the num1 is valid. So we're going to increment the number of ways by the number of ways for I plus 1, which is ways 1, as we can see here. And then if num2 is in between 10 to 26, then num2 is also valid. Then we can increment ways by ways I plus 2, which is ways 2 here. Then we're going to update the two variables. So I'm going to set ways 2 to ways 1, and then we're going to set ways 1 to ways, and then we can return ways 1, which is the number of ways we decode starting from index 0. Let's go over the time and space complexity. So the time complexity is O of n, where n is the length of the input string. We visit each index once, and our space complexity is O of 1. Let's go over the code. So instead of creating an array, we're going to create two variables. Int ways 1 is the number of ways at I plus 1, initially 1, and ways 2 initially be 0. And then we're going to iterate from the last index to 0. We'll create a variable ways to keep track of the number of ways at the current index. Then we decode 1 digit, decode 2 digit. If the 1 digit is valid, we can increment the number of ways by number of ways at I plus 1, so it's ways 1. And then if num2 is within the valid range, we want to increment the number of ways by the ways 2. And then we can return ways 1. Before that, we also need to update our two variables. So I'm going to set ways 2 to ways 1, and we'll set ways 1 to ways. Let me know if any questions in the comment section below.